everyone. I'm Kat Mortensen from ALEC Public Affairs, and today I'm thrilled to be joined remotely by two really lovely guests. One is Karla Jones. You can see her there remotely. She's joining us from Idaho, and she is a senior task force director here at ALEC. And our guest today is a Ukraine member of parliament. Now, her name's a little difficult for me, but I think I can get it. Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze. And we are so excited to have you joining us today. Ivanna has several really fancy titles that I'm going to maybe let her explain to you. But let's just say in short, in addition to being a member of the Ukraine parliament, she has been active in trying to get Ukraine integrated into Europe as well as NATO. That's been a focus of much of her work. So we're pleased that she's with us today. And what we want to talk to her today about is her efforts to highlight the plight of women and girls on the front line of the war in Ukraine. So welcome, Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze, and of course, welcome to Karla.
Thank you so much. And let's continue with Ivanna.
Thank you. Okay. So I think I just want to tell you kind of how we came about this idea of interviewing Ivanna. As soon as we decided that this was a focus of our Women's History Month, we realized that there are stories coming from Ukraine that need to be shared and need to be heard by those of us here in the United States. So that was our thinking. And Karla, can I just ask you, because you really were the one who created this and had the original idea, what were your thoughts about why this issue is so important for Women's History Month?
Thanks for that question, Kat, because you're absolutely right. The minute you guys mentioned wanting to do a series, I immediately said we need to talk about the women of Ukraine. And the reason for that, well, there are many reasons for that. First, generally, I was concerned about war fatigue in the United States. It seemed like even conservatives were beginning not to understand that Ukraine's fight was genuinely the fight of global democracy. And do we need oversights of the funds being spent? Absolutely, we do. Can we supply so much aid that our own national security is compromised? Of course not, but we're not even close to doing that. And a Russian victory, to me, is a much greater national security threat because Putin's not going to stop at Ukraine. Global democracy and national security are on the line, as is the global rules-based order. Xi Jinping is paying attention to everything we do in Ukraine. And so the outcome of this war is going to inform Xi Jinping's decisions on Taiwan. And Taiwan, by the way, has been an incredibly staunch defender of Ukraine since Russia's invasion. And then there's the human aspect. And that was the one that I brought up in the meeting. Not only democracy versus autocracy, but frankly, it's a fight of good versus evil. Russia is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity and must be stopped. I attended a discussion at the Ukraine House a couple of weeks ago where Ukrainian civilian and military women described being captured by Russians and how they were brutalized by Russians when they were in captivity. So can you tell our viewers, Ivanna, who may not be aware of the extent of Putin's war crimes, what is happening to women and men that are captured by the Russians, both civilians and military personnel?
Well, thank you very much for reaching out, and thank you for wanting to tell in more detail the peculiarities of this brutal, barbaric war that Russian Federation is fighting against Ukraine and against the free world. And you are totally right that this is the war of good versus evil. This is totally black and white. And we are very, very grateful. And I should start from that for all the support that we are getting from all the nations of the free world who share the values for which Ukrainians are standing at this particular moment. And you are right that unfortunately, Russian Federation does not at all comply with any of the provisions of the Geneva Conventions with regard to prisoners of war, with regard to people who are under occupation, with regard to its responsibility to care about those territories that they even occupied. They are just destroying it to the ground. And unfortunately, people who have gone through captivity, they have suffered what we've learned from those who have been released, who we managed to already bring back. They have suffered immense humiliation, deprivation of medicine, deprivation of food, tortures, the rapes. And this, it's so brutal, so unimaginable, so inhumane that I think we in the 21st century cannot even imagine that these things are happening in the middle of Europe, and that there are people who can actually carry that out at this particular moment, with no real punishment. And so that's why for us it's extremely important to ensure that A, we are getting all our people back, or B, we are returning our territories and liberating our people, but also that we will get to that point that those people, starting from Putin and his clique, from his those guys who are taking the decisions, ending with all those who are carrying out those orders, that they will be brought to justice through the International Criminal Court, through the International Court of Justice, and hopefully also with the International Tribunal that will be set up in order to try Putin and the highest authorities of the Russian Federation for the crime of aggression, the biggest crime. And also, unfortunately, we see that that this attempts of capturing Ukrainian territory and capturing Ukrainian people, they are also having the traces of genocidal war. And this is unfortunately not the first time when Russians have been trying to extinguish us from the map of the world as Ukrainians, as a nation, as a country. But thankfully to our defense forces, thankfully to mobilization, incredible mobilization of our society, and the support that we are getting from the free world, we are standing, and we hope to have the victory in this war for survival, and war for international law, and war for real basic principles of human rights, respect to personality, to a human being that is ongoing right now in our territory.
Ivanna, thank you for sharing that with us. And I put up a screen that I'm going to put it up briefly here. This is a story of female fighters detail Russian atrocities in Ukraine. I think, first of all, some of us in the United States may be surprised to learn that there are women in combat roles right now in Ukraine. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that. But in addition, you mentioned Vladimir Putin, of course, and I just want to remind people here in the U.S. that the International Criminal Court has charged Vladimir Putin with war crimes, but a lot of us aren't aware of what particular crimes he is charged with. What are those atrocities? And I know you did mention some of those there. Can you just give us a few details about the women in these combat roles and some of these atrocities that Putin has been charged with?
Absolutely. Women, along with men, have been signing up voluntarily to serve in the armed forces of Ukraine, in the forces of defense. And we have increased numbers of women who are serving in serious military positions right now. About 5,000 women are serving in the front. Unfortunately, we have more than 100 women who were killed in action. We have a couple of hundred women who were wounded in action at this particular moment. But that does not change their resolve. And they are not serving exclusively in, let's say, medical positions, but they are snipers, they are artillerists, they are even working on tanks. I mean, they are as good, as efficient as men in those positions. And moreover, we have increased the number of women over the last 9 years of this war in the armed forces. And I want to underline, this war did not start on the 24th of February of 2022. We have to remember that it started with the Russian Federation illegally annexing part of our territory, Crimea, back in 2014. And before 2022, we have lost more than, almost 15,000 people killed in action. We have lost in wounded more than 35,000 people, not lost, but they were badly wounded, and we still have to take care of those people. And millions even before that have been before that 22nd year have been displaced, and Ukraine has been dealing with this predominantly, with taking having some support, but really taking care of the problem on its own. And only after Russian Federation has escalated it to this full-scale invasion over the whole country, we are grateful that the whole world finally heard our cry out for the support and for the need to step in with weapons, with financial aid, with humanitarian aid, with sanctions, real serious sanctions against Russian Federation, as opposed to what was happening back in 2014, because those sanctions against Russia when it annexed Crimea, they were, I have to be sincere and honest, they were pitiful. And I've been very clearly telling this to my colleagues in different capitals over these years. But finally, we are all on board. And this is very important, because this is not the war exclusively against Ukraine. And yes, we are suffering. Our women are suffering. Our children are suffering. Our elderly are suffering. And all of us are living in this situation when we can die every single moment. But finally, we feel that we are not alone in this fight. With regard to, you were asking that about women, but you were also asking what kind of atrocities Russian Federation, or Putin rather, is being charged with by ICC. The ICC just recently, International Criminal Court just recently came up with the arrest warrant for Putin and for Children's Ombudsman of the Russian Federation. Why? Because we have proven, we have 16,000 of proven cases of Ukrainian children being abducted, forcefully deported from the occupied territories to the territory of Russian Federation, and forcefully being given to Russian families. And that is just one of the traces of genocide, when kids from one ethnicity, from one nation, are forcefully being put in another ethnicity. We have been happy to bring back 329 kids out of those 16,000, but this is, in comparison to where we are, it's nothing. Every single life matters, but we still have to do so much more. And we have to understand, 16,000 cases, these are cases only the ones that we have the information on, that we have been approached by Ukrainian families, not necessarily parents, but even the grandmothers, godmothers, godfathers of those children. But unfortunately, what we hear, that these numbers of abducted Ukrainian children can be as high as not only tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian kids being forcefully deported. For example, they are taking them, they are coming to the families on the occupied territories and saying, okay, we are taking your child to a camp for a week. She or he will have a good time for some vacation time. and then they never return the child, and then the parents do not have contact with the child, and then they are forcefully putting the child in the Russian family. So, but this is, or there are cases when the parents are killed by the Russian bombs on the Ukrainian citizens, and then they think that there is no one to care of that particular child. But we in Ukraine, we have actually changed our legislation, making right now it's easier for close family or even close friends of families to be able to take kids in under their not parenting, but under their how do you call it?
Like care,
yeah, not necessarily even to adopt, but to take care of the child. So we have the legal procedure that even if the child was lost his or her parents, we can their aunt or their grandparents or their even close friends of the family can take care of the child. So we have the possibility to take them back, but there are very, very little, unfortunately, legal instruments to make sure that Russia returns these children. And we have been working with different international organizations, with different informal groups, with human rights organizations. But as I said, the number of the returned children is really, really small in comparison to the number of those who have been abducted and deported forcefully.
Absolutely. And I know as a parent, one of the first things my husband and I did was create a will where we codified exactly where our children would go if the two of us got killed in a car crash. So I'm sure the Ukrainian parents had instructions in place. And this is exactly what I meant by I want our viewers to understand that this really is a fight between good and evil. And thank you for mentioning that this war really began in 2014, if not before, and Ukrainians have been fighting ever since. And frankly, the West's inaction in 2014 is what led to the current invasion, because Putin felt like, well, they're not doing much about the annexation of Crimea and the Donbass. Let's go a little further. And thought that the West still wouldn't respond. Thankfully, the West did. And one of the things at the Ukraine House discussion that I referenced before, the women who had been captured talked about how the International Red Cross hadn't been adequately monitoring the facilities where Ukrainian prisoners were being held. Do you think international organizations are doing enough to monitor Russia's human rights violations?
Unfortunately, the Red Cross does not have access to Ukrainian prisoners of war in the Russian Federation. But I don't think that they are doing enough in order to push Russia to comply to the need for these international organizations that have that humanitarian mandate to be able to go and ensure that Ukrainians are actually being fed, that they are not being tortured, that they are being kept in normal humane conditions there on the territory of Russian Federation. We've seen our prisoners of war returning. You would not recognize those people. I don't know whether you can pull any of the pictures of our great warriors, both men and women, who went with the just looking normal, but then were coming back as if they were going through World War II concentration camp. That's exactly how they look after coming back from the captivity in the Russian Federation. And then on the top of they are not provided with any medical assistance there, hardly, even if they are wounded. Sometimes we hear the stories that being wounded, they have not received even the basic care or the painkillers for their suffering and so on. So, I mean, this all just shows that we are standing against not only a bully, we are standing against people who decided to violate all the basic principles of humanity, and they do not think that basic principles of humanity are or should be part of their culture. And that's exactly what they want to impose on the world. And you are so right, Karla, when you are saying that basically the previous inaction of the world, not only towards the aggression against Ukraine back in 2014, but also to the attack on Georgia back in 2008, for example, that indulged appetite of Putin, and they decided that it is okay to further attack sovereign nation and to take the territory and to destroy the infrastructure, destroy the homes of people, destroy our electricity grid. They were trying to freeze us this winter because they, with their air attacks by drones, by rockets, they have been targeting our electricity grids, our transformers, our electricity power stations. So they were hoping that people would turn against our government to demand capitulation, that they want to give in. But people understand, and that's something to also understand, that in order to survive, in order to have the future, we have to win this war. In order to have the light at the end of the tunnel, and have this possibility to join the European, Euro-Atlantic community, which we have been trying to do over years, we have to ensure that we are restoring the borders of Ukraine in accordance with the international law, and that will finally, the defeat of Russia will finally stop Russia. And that means if we defeat altogether Russia in Ukraine, then Russia will not pose any additional threat neither to Georgia, nor to Moldova, nor to Baltic countries in NATO, or any other country in the world, because Russia has been living its life, so to say, by fighting, conquering wars over centuries. And it has to be stopped at this moment. And you're also very right when you are saying that leaders of China are watching very carefully the situation, how it is being developed, and how the West is responding to this Russian attack. If Russia is stopped in Ukraine, then it means that there is no there is no additional temptation for China to try to take Taiwan. But if Russia is allowed to be left with even tiny part of the Ukrainian territory, that means that the power of might is ruling as opposed to power of right in this world. And we cannot allow this to happen. I think it's in the basic national interest of every sovereign nation and sovereign people.
I was actually one of those people in 2008 who was calling for NATO to offer both Georgia and Ukraine a membership action plan. And it was a lonely place to be in 2008. But honestly, I think if we had done it, we wouldn't be here today. We
wouldn't be.
No. And one of the things that ALEC did recently was we updated our model policy on integrating Moldova into Western institutions, because we concluded that in order to counter aggression, in order for countries in Russia's near abroad to grow their economies, to strengthen their democracies, greater integration for countries adjacent to Russia was needed, and greater integration into Western institutions. And both Moldova and Ukraine have been granted EU candidate status, and Ukraine seems to be on a fast track to European accession. When I visited Kyiv back in 2019, one of the things that really struck me was there was signage all over the place commemorating NATO's anniversary. And I think the average American rarely thinks about NATO. And Ukraine has NATO accession written into the Constitution, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us from your perspective why it's so important for countries like Ukraine, like Moldova, like Georgia, to join institutions like the European Union and NATO?
Karla, real quick before you answer, Ivanna, Karla, this is a picture you shared with me that I said, I think you took this. And what is this a reference to? What is this?
It's Ukraine-NATO Partnership for Peace.
Exactly.
Ah.
Thank you. I took that in the Kyiv metro, and it was like all the way down the escalator, there were all these NATO signs saying NATO stronger together. I mean, all kinds of NATO signs. And then when the taxi took me into Kyiv, there was a sign saying happy birthday NATO. I mean, you rarely see NATO signs on the metro, even going to the Pentagon.
That's true. That's true. Well, it was 70th anniversary of NATO at that point. And
ALEC had model policy on that as well, commemorating NATO's 70th anniversary.
And yes, you are right that we, back in early 2019, we have included the membership in NATO and membership in the EU as strategic goals in our constitution. And I'm very proud to be part of that process as then Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, because the government also had to give their opinion. We had to work with our colleagues parliamentarians to ensure that that is happening, and I'm very proud that we did it. And at this particular moment, we have more than 86 something percent of our population that, according to the polls, are supporting both EU membership and NATO membership. And that has to also be very well understood that Ukrainians are clear about their direction of their future, if or when rather we will win this war together with you. But also it has to be understood that there is no durable peace and there is no durable and sustainable security in that part of the world if such countries as Ukraine, obviously after the end of the war, will not become part of NATO and will not become part of the EU. This is for us, it's pretty basic. For us, we understand that Ukraine can actually already bring a lot of additional knowledge, additional practical knowledge for all the militaries in NATO, for example. I think nobody else in the world has this combat experience as our forces right now fighting the war with the Russian army. But also, I'm sure that Ukraine can bring also a lot of other experiencing, like fighting and countering the information propaganda, cybersecurity issues. So we have a lot to share and to bring on for NATO to be stronger. And we have to understand, again, if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine, then Russia will, by conquering Ukraine, it will go further. Definitely. Georgia, Moldova do not have any chance to have the independence and their countries to continue existing if we fall, if we fail in Ukraine. Obviously, even Belarus, that is right now under the leadership of another dictator, but there are forces in Belarus who want the country to go on a normal track of development, on a democratic track of development. They don't have any chance. They don't have if Ukraine fails, and Belarus right now by dictator Lukashenko is helping Russian Federation. So we have to understand. But if we will stop Russia, if we will defeat Russia, if we will isolate and weaken Russia to the extent that it cannot carry out any additional attack on anybody else, that means that Russia will not ever dare to attack NATO. And that's why it's important that this space of security is widening in Europe, on the European continent. And that's why such countries as Ukraine, as Georgia, as Moldova, maybe even one day Belarus would have to be part of those security arrangements, and also the space of prosperity, of the respect of human rights, of democracy, and of rule of law, as EU is offering. And so that's why we are working very hard right now, together between the parliament and the government, trying during the war. And this is also unique. The parliament is, working during this brutal war. The government, local governments are working right now. So it's a functional state, irrespectively of the tragedies that we are experiencing across the country. Yes, we have more than 8 million people who have fled the country. We have about 8 million people who have become internally displaced people right now in Ukraine. So this is, huge tectonic thing. But at the same time, we are working to ensure that we are transforming the country while we are fighting the war, in order to comply to those conditions that have been accompanying the decision on the candidate status for future EU membership. So, and we hope that maybe before the end of this year, by fulfilling the 7 conditions that have been outlined for us with the decision on the candidate status for the EU, that we can start negotiating on accession, that we can open these negotiations. And that would be a great an important process for Ukraine, because it would be additional magnifying lens, ensuring that Ukraine is transforming in the way that it is becoming closer by all the procedures, by all the practices to our European partners. But definitely, the EU membership is not enough. NATO membership matters, and right now we are waiting for the Vilnius summit to happen in July, Vilnius NATO summit, which will be happening in July. And I think it is the time that the US would take leadership, as it was back in 2008, because it was the US position to get Ukraine and Georgia then membership action plan. But unfortunately, our colleagues then, Germany and France, were totally against this, and they blocked it. So right now, I think we are still lacking the US leadership in that particular sense, to upgrade the NATO policy towards Ukraine and say out loud, yes, guys, you will be in. And the language should be much more ambitious than it was in Budapest summit.
Ivanna, I want to thank you so much for your sharing your story here with us today, and advocating, obviously, for your country and for peace in that region and an end to this war, and for freedom and democracy in Ukraine. And thank you. And Karla, obviously, thank you for you setting this up and getting this ball rolling. I want to be mindful of the Ivanna's time. I think your assistant told me you had a 30-minute window, and then you have other appointments and schedules. So I apologize, Karla, if I'm going to cut off any last question you had, but I know that Ivanna has to get going. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and thank Karla and, of course, Ivanna for being with us today. And we appreciate what you're doing out there in the States. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.